If it's possible, would you let me know, am I under investigation? He said, you are not under investigation.
Let's dive right in with my panel. Matt, I'm coming to you first.
Sure.
Is it different? Is it different what Bill Clinton is accused of doing? We don't actually know what they talked about, but let's assume the worst. And what President Trump admitted to having done.
I think the big difference in a lot of people's minds, and I think in the president's mind, is this, is Donald Trump the target of an FBI investigation? This is the piece of all of this. We say, is there an investigation? Is there not an investigation? Having worked in the White House, been around these types of investigations, the first thing you want to know is, are you a target, or are they just checking around you to see wrongdoing? From everything I can tell about Comey, they're checking around the campaign to see if there's wrongdoing. At no point has anybody ever said the president is a target. The difference with Hillary Clinton is that it was actually her activities that were front and center of an investigation that took many fronts on her handling of sensitive information.
Michelle?
That's the big difference.
I think what we've learned in the short Trump era so far is that it's always different when it's Donald Trump involved. There's no situation in which he cannot explain why it's perfectly fine what he's done, and it doesn't matter if it's inappropriate to ask that question or to have those discussions. I suspect he could sit you down and have a good conversation about why it's perfectly above board.
What do you think?
You know, I think it's pretty clear that there's a reason why no one wants to say in a public setting whether Donald Trump is being investigated or not, and that's because it's the subject of an investigation. And, you know, if Donald Trump, even if Donald Trump is not the actual subject of this investigation, but his associates are, his campaign is, he was the head of that campaign, that seems to me to be an analogous situation to Bill Clinton, who is not Hillary Clinton and was not himself under investigation. But if Bill Clinton did in fact talk to Loretta Lynch about his wife, then it's a very similar situation. The degrees of separation here are not that great, and I think everything I've seen suggests that it's very inappropriate for someone who would have been the head of a campaign under investigation to ask repeatedly or to be told repeatedly that he was not under investigation. No one has publicly confirmed that, Matt.
Can I say, as we're sitting here talking, one of the things I always wondered in the midst of that incredible historic campaign was, what were the conversations between the Obama White House and Jim Comey on Hillary's investigation? We really never got that answer. Did he talk to Valerie Jarrett ever about it? Did he talk to President Obama ever about it? Did he talk to the Chief of Staff ever about it? What you're really asking is that, can there be that kind of conversation between the White House and the FBI? If you're going to make the comparison, whatever happened with those conversations? I always wondered, why did Jim Comey seem so frustrated when he went public against Hillary Clinton's actions? He didn't indict her, but he seemed to almost want to publicly indict her. Why did he do that? What were the conversations that led to that?
And those conversations might matter more if Hillary Clinton were president.
Right. I want to, President
I guess we have Jim Comey to thank for her not being president.
President Trump just tweeted something, and we know he watches cable, and we were just talking a few minutes ago about the Russians laughing, and here we have President Trump saying Russia must be laughing up their sleeves, watching as the U.S. tears itself apart over a Democrat excuse for losing the election. First of all, President Trump, thanks for watching. We appreciate it. But Michelle, what do you make of the fact that the Russians were laughing? Sergei Lavrov was laughing, mocking the idea that Comey was fired and people were asking about it. How did you take that?
You know, look, internationally, there is a lot of kind of questions about how this president operates, you know, whether he thinks things through. Of course, they're going to take any opportunity where it looks like he's done something that is politically boneheaded or ethically questionable to giggle up their sleeves. I suspect they are not the only ones. But, you know, Trump doesn't much seem to care.
Abby, I want to ask you about the president's signing of a new executive order today. It creates a commission on voter fraud. It will be headed by Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach and Vice President Pence. It looks into the unsubstantiated claims that 3 to 5 million illegal votes were cast for Hillary Clinton. So I've heard Democrats on the Hill complaining now taxpayer dollars are actually going to be spent looking into a crazy conspiracy theory there's no evidence for.
Yeah, well, we'll see how much taxpayer dollar is actually spent toward this end. It seems like the White House wants to follow through on something the president promised, even though there's no evidence. But it's actually, I think, beyond the optics of this. You know, Chris Kobach is a very controversial figure, someone who has been believed to be pushing certain kinds of ID laws that Democrats say lead to voter suppression. So this is, whether it's real or not, putting someone that controversial in charge of something that could end up looking like an effort to sort of push certain kinds of voter ID laws from the federal level is going to create a lot of political controversy going down the road. This is something that will only extend this issue for the president at a time when he probably ought to just let this one fall by the wayside and move on to things that are more relevant to his agenda, especially the economy.
And Matt, let me just say, I'll go on the record. I'm opposed to voter fraud. I'm opposed to voter suppression. After the 2000 election, George W. Bush appointed a commission. It was headed by Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford.
I remember.
And it was a bipartisan commission.
Yep.
This commission does not appear to be in that same spirit, especially headed as it is by Chris Kobach, who I think it's fair to say is fairly controversial, even within his own state.
I know him well. I'm a Kansan, so I know him, and I know of the controversies. The one thing I would like to correct is that the funding will have to get approved by Congress, and Congress can block the funding. And when it comes to the question of illegal voting, I think it's something we should all be against. And if there are facts, it's interesting. You know, Reince Priebus, the chief of staff, he was the RNC chair for a long time. He's sitting in the White House. The RNC prosecuted all these cases, and there are dozens of cases of illegal voting. It's interesting that you know, the RNC has a lot.
Dozens of cases of illegal voting.
Yeah, even more than dozens. Actually, hundreds of cases.
He's claiming millions.
I'm just telling you what there is. It's interesting that the people that actually handle that are actually working in the Trump White House.
I just like that.
I hope
Dozens of cases of illegal voting.
No one disputes that there are dozens of cases of illegal voting. The question is, are there millions?
I just said documented. So the question is, how deep does the problem go? Just because you don't have prosecutions of millions doesn't mean that there's not a lot of...
That's not how you assign who gets investigated, though. You don't do it because there's no proof that there's not.
No, but the country should figure out the circumstances by which people are able to vote illegally, and we should tighten it up.
Now, let me ask you, are you as concerned, or let's forget as concerned, you're against voter fraud. Are you also, as am I, are you against voter suppression?
I don't know. Define it for me, and I probably am, but define it.
If people who are legally permitted to vote in this country are not able to, for various reasons.
Just as bad. Both of those would be just as bad. Some people define voter suppression a lot more aggressively, and I don't have any problem with, like, for instance, advocating for your candidate right up until the minute before the election. I have no problem with electioneering around a election site, but I agree with you. If anybody who's legally allowed to vote is somehow blocked because of their political opponents, that's un-American and disgraceful.
But let me ask you this, do you agree that this commission, assuming it's funded, would be better if it were headed by a Democrat and a Republican, and then the results would be more credible to the public?
I think it's better on the questions, on these kind of questions that get to all, like, the most sensitive questions in our culture. I think it's always better if we handle